Welcome to this special edition, this basketball edition of the Gator Sports Podcast. I am Charles, and joining with me, because I know roughly zero about basketball, is Andy, the managing editor of Alligator Army. Andy, we are now, I guess, halfway through our SEC schedule, most of the way through the season. How are you feeling about our team right now?
I'm feeling really, really good. I think right now there are probably 4 or 5 teams that I think are going to be 1 seeds and going to have chances at a national title, and Florida's definitely one of them.
Well, I mean, let me ask you this question: Who do you think? Where do you think Florida stands in relation to those top teams?
The only team that's in that top 5 or so, and I think the top 5 is Indiana, Miami, Michigan, Florida, probably Duke in there too, maybe Arizona if you want to make it a top 6. The only team that I would pick Florida to lose to more often than not is Indiana, I think.
Well, right now, I mean, Indiana lost last week to Illinois, and they were ranked 1, and they lost to Illinois, and they remained ranked 1. Duke is right beneath them at 12, but they, of course, lost to the team right beneath them by like a 20-point margin. They lost to Miami. Mm-hmm. And then beneath them is a Michigan team that has showed some flaws. And then we have Gonzaga, who's coming along a bit stronger. I mean, some of these teams seem to have an advantage in terms of they've just played more games than Florida. Does that all catch up by the season's end?
I mean, that's not a huge deal in basketball, really. The thing that's helping both of those Big Ten teams, Indiana and Michigan, and the ACC teams, Duke and Miami, is that they played each other in a lot of ways. And Florida the top-ranked teams Florida's played are Missouri and Mississippi and this Tuesday Kentucky, and those teams are not on par with these teams in other conferences. So when Florida wins a game, it's obviously a game that they should win, even against a good team in conference. Whereas when Indiana goes on the road to Ohio State, like they did on Sunday, I think, and knocks off the Buckeyes there, it's a good win, and it's a win big enough that helps Indiana stay number 1. I've written. Go ahead.
We had that KSU game. Mm-hmm. Ever since that KSU game, up until the Arkansas game, Florida looked really unstoppable. And Florida kind of hit a brick wall there when Arkansas scored 80 points, which I don't think no one else has done against Florida this entire year.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone else is going to do that against Florida this entire year.
How seriously should we take that Arkansas loss?
There's an interesting Grantland post written by Mark Titus that uses a really awful metaphor of Florida as essentially it's just a terrible metaphor, and I'm not even going to dignify it. But he's saying that people are going to look at Florida a little strange because of that one big loss. I think if people go look at what Arkansas shot from the field in that game, they started 15 of 20, and they never really fully cooled off. Arkansas shot the hell out of the ball in that game. And, I don't care what team you are or how good your defense is, you're not going to survive if the other team's making a bunch of 25-foot threes and a bunch of contested threes. And if you get a couple of those going against you, you can probably survive it. If you get 5 or 6 of them, you won't.
Well, Florida scored a little beneath their average with the 69 points. Mm-hmm. I'd say that's from what I see, that's about 5 or 6 points lower than normal.
Yeah, that's about right.
So it seems like the real difference is Arkansas just scoring 80. And I've heard from some other SEC fans that Arkansas at home is a completely different team. We are getting Arkansas here at the O'Connell Center on the 23rd. Do you expect it to just be completely different?
Yeah, I genuinely think that though Arkansas is definitely better at home and has played better at home all year against everybody, Arkansas got really hot, and when you get really hot, you can win games like that. It's not a reliable strategy, but it's a good one. If you don't miss shots, you're going to win games. I think it's far less likely Arkansas is going to do that.
Well, we had something of a fortunate bookend, because before we lost to Arkansas, we beat Ole Miss, who had, the question was, would we be able to stop Marshall Henderson? Mm-hmm. And he got his points, which I guess is a weird thing. We were able to stop Ole Miss, even though Marshall Henderson basically got his. Was that a problem with Florida's defense? Was Marshall Henderson just shooting like the way was that just a hot game for him?
Yeah, it was a really good game for him. And I think one of the weird things about that Florida-Mississippi game, and I talked to a couple other people who felt like this too, is that it felt like a really close game, despite the fact that Florida was leading by 10, 12, 15, 20 points for most of the game. And that was because Henderson was really shooting well. I think that's one of his better games as a college player. You've got one guy who gets hot and scores. I think he had 31 in that game. I might be wrong.
I think he had high 20 something.
Yeah, if you've got a guy who's scoring 24 or 25 up into the 30s, you're probably going to have trouble unless you shut everybody else down. And basically, Florida did that. It was Henderson and not a whole lot else.
Well, I remember watching him sink one of those double clutch threes, and with Scotty Wilbekin right in his face. So I guess you never know. I mean, so we saw the Ole Miss game, we saw the Arkansas game. What was your impression then of the Kentucky game, since it just happened on Tuesday?
I think it's a really good win in that Florida took a punch. Kentucky was up 4-0 early, a couple of early fouls on Eric Murphy and Patrick Young, and just didn't let that punch affect them, really. Florida was out to a typical double-digit lead by the end of the first half, led by double digits throughout the second half. Nerlens Noel is the most talented player on the floor until he goes down, obviously, and Florida was able to stone him pretty effectively inside. Florida made its shots. These are things that Florida's been able to do against every team it's played, except maybe Arkansas, and to a lesser extent against Arizona and Kansas State. And if Florida can continue to do, a lot of good on the defensive end and a lot of good on the offensive end, as has been the case in pretty much every game this year, Florida's really tough to beat on a nightly basis. And I wish I could say that this is something bigger and more romantic or more outstanding than that, but Florida's just a really good, balanced team. And if you want to see a team play good team basketball, I don't think there's a better team to watch than Florida this year.
Well, Florida is now 10-1 in the SEC. They have 7 games more to go in the conference, and then we have the SEC tournament, which is probably 3 or 4 more games or so. So we really are about halfway through in terms of dealing with SEC opponents. Do you think that Florida will be negatively impacted by playing these SEC opponents, or do you think there still is a lot of positive Florida can get out of literally just crushing the Auburns of the world, the Tennessees of the world, the Alabamas of the world?
I think the typical SEC game, Kentucky's different, Missouri's different, Mississippi's a little bit different, is a no-win situation for Florida. I mean, if you lose that game, you're going to lose NCAA tournament seed line stock, and if you lose that game, people are going to wonder whether or not you're a good team. But if you win that game, the benefits aren't really there. I mean, no one cares if you beat Auburn. No one cares if you beat Arkansas. So I don't know if that is part of it, but I don't think that Florida playing well because of the way they're playing well and the way they played well, so well that beating SEC teams by 20, so on, has become a routine occurrence. I don't think if you're playing that well, it matters who you're playing, really. If you've got that execution down, then execution is execution, and it doesn't really matter who you do it against.
I mean, we've definitely seen Florida play well, and I'm looking at the roster, and we've been getting, we have a pretty good rotation, especially with Michael Frazier 2 coming in, and he actually got the start for one of the games. I believe he got the start for the Ole Miss game.
I think he got the start over the weekend, not the Ole Miss game. God, I'm going to forget.
Mississippi State game?
Mississippi State game, yeah.
Well, Mississippi State. And he ended up shooting extremely well. He's been playing very well. Yeah. And, to some degree, you have to wonder if he's making up for Kenny Boynton right now. Tell me a little bit about where you think Kenny Boynton's at.
I think he's working himself back into being a 2 guard, and it was the bad slump that he had earlier this season where he was something like 3 of 30 from 3 over 7 games or something. That wasn't Kenny Boynton playing the position he's used to playing. It was Kenny playing a lot more point guard and trying to do a lot more than he usually does. Since he's been moved back and Scotty Wilbekin's done more as the point guard, he's been better shooting the ball. He hasn't been great. He was, I think, great last year. He was shooting over 40% from the field, and that's a great number for anyone, or 40% from three, I should say, and that's a great number for anyone from there. But he's back to somewhere in between the terrible shooting he was doing in his freshman and sophomore years and the more respectable shooting he was doing when he was sort of cooling down after a really hot non-conference season last year.
He seems to still have a tendency to jack threes.
It's a weird thing with him is that he's the one guy who has partly earned this as a senior, but who will take a three out of rhythm with the offense. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because he's been really good at making those threes on his own and he's a good individual ball player. But when you're not making them or when you're taking them and you're releasing from a bunch of different points, as I saw him against Mississippi State release 2 threes from 2 entirely different points in his shot. When you're doing that, you're not shooting a consistent shot. You're not, doing what you need to be doing. And it's not just the jacking threes that's an important part of his game or an important negative about his game. It's are these shots that he is taking that are the best shots he can take in that moment, even if he's jacking.
Well,
and frankly, I'm more worried about that.
One of the things we see with Florida's offensive efficiency is that Florida commonly pass out of good shots for the potential of a great shot.
Yeah.
And Kenny Boynton, if he's on his game, an open look from three is supposed to be extremely useful for someone like him. But when he goes ice cold, I mean, it seems like Kenny Boynton's trying to make up for that by trying to drive the basketball. He's been dishing out a bunch more assists. He's been doing pretty well with rebounding. Do you think that's him trying to make up for him knowing he has an ice cold shot, or do you think he's just trying to fill out his game in a general way?
I think that's the maturation of his game as he's come to be a senior. Some of those assists are because he was playing point guard more, and he was playing point guard better than he was playing. He was distributing more as a point guard than he was as an off guard, and he's rebounding better because he's getting down there and making sure to do that. But I don't know that he's really conscious of, I need to do X, Y, and Z because I'm not making these shots. I think it's more that he's just taken on more. And there's frankly been more available to him because Bradley Beal did so much last year that is not being done by a similar player this year.
Well, we've seen we've seen him be incredible at times, and we've seen him be kind of off at times. It's a bit strange to see other guards step into place though, like Mike Rosario, who is I guess the next player we can talk about, has really developed a mid-range game. And he's really improved those little floaters into the lane that he's been doing. He seems to be the guy who's almost consistently good at that. And those seem to create a lot of opportunities across the board, namely for Eric Murphy getting the three, Patrick Young to just throw down a jam. But, how do you feel about Mike Rosario? Because he's not originally a Florida, a Florida player. He's, came from Rutgers. Mm-hmm. He was playing off the bench last year. He seems to be starting a good amount this year. What can you tell me about Mike Rosario?
He's the guy, you say he wasn't originally a Florida player. He's the guy who I'm proudest of for becoming a Billy Donovan player, really, because he's gotten away from doing the jacking that he was doing at Rutgers when he was taking 20, 25 shots a game sometimes. He's taking about 8 to 10 shots per game, which is reasonable in the course of Florida's offense, and he's taking good ones. He's a guy who'll pull up and take an open 15, 18-footer and usually make them. And he's a guy who shoots really well from three, and he makes a lot better decisions with the ball than he used to last year when he was a turnover machine. So, he's a guy who had a lot of flaws in his game that he's buffered out to an extent. And that's something that is, I think, both testament to Billy Donovan's coaching and, knowing what the flaws in a talented player's game are, and also to him putting in the effort to make sure that he doesn't make the mistakes that were really marring his game last year.
So do you see a potential? We've now, Kenny Boyd and Mike Rosario both seniors. Mm-hmm. Do you see Mike Rosario getting to the NBA, or you see Kenny Boyd potentially doing that?
I think it's going to be hard for both of them because of their height. Rosario's a little bit taller, but even he's probably on the high side of 6'2", not quite legitimately 6'3". I've walked by Kenny Boynton plenty of times. He's not the 6'2" they list him at. So it's tough for smaller guards to make it in the NBA unless they're really great shooters. And Kenny's a little bit streakier. Mike's got a set shot that isn't exactly a quick one. I mean, I don't know. I think they'll both play professionally somewhere if they want it. Kenny's way too good a scorer not to, and Mike can go play in Puerto Rico, his native country, if he wants. But, these things, whether a guy's an NBA player doesn't make him any better or worse a college player. So,
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's talk about one of the guys who came in as a 2-star and now could probably make a case for actually going to the NBA just based on his defense alone. Scotty Wilbekin has really just shut down some of the best point guards we've seen in the SEC, including the Mizzou point guard. And Marshall Henderson did get his points, but was not out of lack of being covered. Scotty Wilbekin, what do you think is Scotty Wilbekin's biggest strength now, besides defense? And where do you see him? Do you see him coming back next year?
Yeah, I think he's definitely coming back. I don't think he's got first-round potential, and I don't think Billy Donovan would let a guy who doesn't have first-round potential go without a fight. But he's become a really efficient distributor of the basketball. He does pretty much everything right on the defensive end, but now he does pretty much everything right on the offensive end. There are still times when I see him dribble into bad shots, and that's, a terrible thing for any point guard to do. He's cut down on that, especially in the last few games. But he's really good at finding guys in positions where they can score with the ball. He doesn't make bad passes very often. He's patient when he's waiting for guys to open up in the post. I think the distribution, really, the ability to find guys for assists and start the offense, which is a really basic thing and something that Florida point guards haven't necessarily done all that well over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. That's a really good thing.
All right. Well, I guess we can finish out our guards here with the freshman who has now gotten the start, Michael Frazier, the second. He recently got a start as a freshman over. Was it over Kenny Boynton who he got the start over?
It was over Scotty Wilbekin. It had something to do with Wilbekin getting benched because Donovan didn't like how he was practicing or something like that. But I mean, the start is a good thing. Yes, go ahead.
Well, he as a 6'4" guard, he's one of our taller guards, and he seems to have a very good shot. He's been making threes like at a pretty high clip. I believe he's in the 40% range actually.
Mm-hmm.
Since he's not gonna be the Bradley Beal and be a one and done, he definitely has a lot of potential going forward. What do you see coming from Michael Frazier?
I mean, I don't think he's a Bradley Beal kind of player because he doesn't have the same sort of explosive athleticism Beal did. And Beal's athleticism, when I say it's explosive, he could get up and dunk and all that good stuff, but he was also really quick and smart and could sort of shift gears better than anyone else. And that's not something I really see from Frazier, at least not yet. But Frazier's a much better shooter, or has been, than Beal was. And he's lethal from behind the arc. He's the guy that you worry about coming in off the bench, making 2 quick threes and turning a 6-point lead into a 15-point lead. So that's what I see him doing for this year's team. He's, an evolutionary Lee Humphrey, maybe, in that, especially as a freshman, he's coming in and making threes and making a defense pay for sagging off of him. If he can turn into the defender that Humphrey was and the driver that Humphrey became, especially later in his career, then the sky's the limit for him as part of a championship team. I don't think he's necessarily going to be the number one guy on a championship team, but there's never enough 3-point shooters for Billy Donovan's offense.
Well, I mean, what we see is we are a guard heavy team, and that's pretty much all the guards who we've seen who have gotten significant playing time thus far. But we also have some hybrid players. Casey Prather, who is recently back from an injury. Plays at the guard and at the forward. He's been doing a little both since he's back from the injury. He finally seems ready to actually get the start. After being eased in these last few games with gradually more and more playing time to make sure he's gets back in the swing of things. How do you see Casey Prather doing? Really coming in these last few games.
I think what I really like about Prather, and I wrote a little bit about this tonight, is that he's making better decisions when the ball is in his hands than I thought he was capable of making at any point in his career.
Well, I did see your GIF. Your GIF, and that was incredible offense.
Yeah, this is a really good play where he gets the ball up on the wing, free, he could take a three pretty easily. The clock's ticking down. No one would have really blamed him for it, but he does something really smart, takes a ball fake, steps in, puts Kyle Wiltshire on skates, gets in for an easy two. And that's something that I wouldn't have trusted him to do. I honestly wouldn't have trusted him with the ball at the 3-point line. I also wouldn't have trusted him to make any moves on the dribble. Certainly wouldn't have trusted to dribble, spin, up to the board, put it in for two. It's just these things that Casey Prather does now do not jibe with the image of Casey Prather I had after 2 years of watching him off the bench.
Well, certainly well-rounded because he's been playing great defense as well.
Yeah,
I mean, the rebounding is one of the big things because after Will You Get got injured, you really needed someone to come in and help fill out the rebounding. Casey Prather really has been doing pretty good work on the boards.
Yeah, I mean, Will You Get I refer to as a genius on the boards. He's a great positional rebounder, understands how to get to different places where the ball is going to be, and understands how to get up, especially on the offensive end, and put a rebound up for an easier putback. Prather's not Will You Get. I don't think Patrick Young or Eric Murphy are Will You Get in that respect either. But Prather's got athleticism that he can use in a similar way, and he's got size that he can use in a similar way. He gets probably right around 6'7", 6'8". Prather's more like 6'6", 6'7". But that's the kind of guy who can come in and be pesky if he's got the right athleticism and the right sort of positioning. And if Prather can learn something from Get and continue using his athleticism as he's been doing, then he's going to have some pretty good rebounding numbers, I think.
And we'll probably get him next year. We'll probably get him back. So he can definitely do a lot still. Well, let's talk about Will You Get since he just got injured, but the injuries luckily came at an as good a time as any you can get an injury, I guess, for a month and a half off. But he'll probably be back for maybe a few games in the SEC tournament, where hopefully you can get warm and then come back to the NCAA tournament. Here's
the thing. It's a 4 to 6 week injury, I think. He had an injury that wasn't necessarily all that different from this last year, and that it was a similar timetable for recovery. And he didn't get back last year. I mean, it was a 6-week injury then. This is more like 4 to 6. But he missed, I think, 5 or 6 games at the end of the year and then missed both the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament. This injury puts him at the 4 weekend getting back right for the SEC tournament, or at the 6 weekend getting back to the Sweet 16. And I think it's probably more likely that he won't play in the SEC tournament while people are trying to figure out whether he's fully healthy and ready to go full go. Well, honestly, if Prather's playing more and closer to 100%, then maybe Prather's the guy who can hold the fort down while he gets hurt.
Well, you've talked about how important the seed is in getting a good seed for the tournament. If Florida gets in at a 1 or 2 seed, the first game or two are going to be substantially easier, than if we were a 7 seed or a 4 seed. That might be enough time to get Will You Get back. It really does seem like Will You Get can, he's able to cover a lot for Patrick Young. He's able to cover a lot for Eric Murphy, and what we really see from him is just he's constantly going. He's hitting every time there's a potential to get a rebound. We see him go for it, and I think that probably builds the energy of the entire team.
Yeah, absolutely. He's the hustle guy, the glue guy. In a past life, Will You Get would have been Dennis Rodman, I think. He's not as athletic as Dennis Rodman, certainly doesn't have the long arms like Rodman did, but it's that sort of constant effort and work rate, really, to borrow a term from soccer. It's work rate, basically, that makes Will You Get as good as he is. Well,
as good as his rebound, I think his offense is a little underrated because he does actually find... he's pretty good at finding Patrick Young when he's down low. And he's pretty good at finishing plays off the glass as well. Yeah, he's got really good hands. That's a good rebounding thing. But those hands have made him a better passer. And I've liked what he's been able to do in the zone, which I thought was a weakness in his game last year, is that he wasn't a really good passer when Florida put him in the zone, the top of the foul line, and made him make a decision. That was not a really good situation for Florida. This year, it wasn't a bad situation when he was healthy, and he was also being able to take people off the dribble and get 2 points, which is something he couldn't do. All right, well, let's talk about basically Chandler Parsons' copy, Eric Murphy, who is trying to fill Chandler Parsons' shoes a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Here, I'll push back on that. Chandler Parsons did more different things with the ball in his hand. We expected Chandler Parsons to be, and he's not LeBron, so I'm not saying that he's anywhere close to LeBron, but we expect him to be a little bit like LeBron, playing that point forward role. Eric Murphy doesn't really do that.
Well, Eric Murphy, I don't know if is capable of doing that.
Yeah, no.
That might be unfair. I mean, Eric Murphy does a lot of things very well.
I don't know that you want to see him running the point.
No,
Yeah.
but he is able to go out and take a three, and that requires, from a 6'10" guy,
Yeah.
Being able to go out and take a three does require a certain amount of movement.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously not probably as talented as Chandler Parsons, not as athletically superior as Chandler Parsons, who's now obviously playing very well in the NBA against extremely good guys, and he's been holding his own fairly well.
Yeah.
But Eric Murphy has really shown, to some degree, he's shown a good ability to round out our offense.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch the 2004 team, one of the keys really for the 04s is that when Lee Humphrey was hitting his threes, that team was basically unstoppable.
Mm-hmm.
If you could hold the perimeter game in check for Florida, you had the chance to beat them because you could really just load everyone into the key and just mob Joakim Noah or Al Horford anytime they got close to getting the ball. But if you had that three, it was you had to pick your poison. You were leaving Lee Humphrey wide open, or you were leaving Torian Green wide open. You couldn't do it. So it seems like Eric Murphy's kind of one of those guys where if he has his three shot, it is incredibly difficult to guard Florida. That even though he's not Chandler Parsons, he is able to create a lot for the offense when he has that 3-point shot.
Yeah, and the thing that makes Murphy's three different in some ways than Humphreys or Green's were is that he's a big guy. I mean, if you're putting somebody on Murphy, you've probably got to get a guy who's at least 6'8" on him so that he can't pull you down low. And then you've got to get a guy who's quick enough to follow him out to the arc and contest these shots. So
he seems to get a lot of open shots. He does get a lot of open shots.
And the other thing is that he lifts, he elevates, and it's not very far. He's not the best athlete.
No, it's not.
He's also 6'10", so he's not needing to jump and make the arc and the angle of the shot all that different. But he elevates like that, and it's really, really, really hard to stop him if you're not already on him. You've just got to hope he misses. So when you combine his good quickness, I don't think he's, very good quickness, but he moves pretty well for a guy who's 6'10", with that shot that he can get up and over any defender, it's really tough to stop him.
Well, just because the potential of having the big man shoot a three usually creates these mismatches, and we've seen Florida exploit that pretty substantially throughout the entire season.
Yeah, I think Murphy being that mismatch creates mismatches in other places too. If you've got to put a guy who's a little bit quicker on Murphy, you've probably got a guy who's not as big on him. Or if you've got a guy who's bigger on Murphy, you might be sacrificing somebody against Willie Gant. And this, that, and the other. And it's just really, really hard to defend four guys who can shoot three, which is what Florida usually has when Murphy's on the floor, when teams don't necessarily have more than 3 or 4 defenders who can really get out there and contest. So.
All right, so let's bring it home with my favorite player of this Florida team is Patrick Young, who even though he's a center, he's listed 6'9". Mm-hmm. He's not the tallest guy, but he might be the most freakishly strong guy I've ever seen. At 6'9", he really looks like he's playing the wrong sport. He is, the word Adonis comes to mind, I guess, for Patrick Young, because I've seen if you've seen his YouTube workout of him doing football workout stuff, it seems that even when he goes up against these lanky guys, these even against Noel, who from Kentucky, Noel had a real hard time pushing around Patrick Young. And
I was gonna say it's really, really hard to push around Patrick Young. Yeah.
So I mean, what's your impression of he's a junior? It's hard to say, I guess, what he will do in the NBA. Besides, he will get there. Just in what capacity, who's to know? But you have to think that someone who runs the floor like Patrick Young does, because for being 250 pounds, he runs the floor like he's being chased by dogs or something. Like, he just gets down the floor so quickly. I see him beating guards down the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, for him, he's really, for me, just the most fun guy to watch, just because seeing such a huge dude who's ripped as well, playing against all these centers, at the college level who are maybe very tall, but just not as strong. It's kind of funny to watch, actually, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to come up with a guy who's a good analog for Patrick Young. I don't think any of the out-fours were like Patrick Young. I mean, you could maybe say that Horford has some similar athleticism, and he's definitely Horford's always been old man strong and hard to move around in the paint. But Young runs a little bit better than Horford does, and he certainly got the more chiseled physique. I think if you drank every time you heard either chiseled or physique applied to Patrick Young, you would have been dead last year. It's been that. The praise is so easy. It's so easy to
There is an analog. It's called Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah.
That's your analog.
Yeah, he's the guy who plays a sport who is just so physically talented that you don't really know how to stop him until you get on the court and maybe start trying to figure out a way. And, you say Patrick Young's playing the wrong sport. I don't know if the sport that Patrick Young is best at has been invented yet, frankly.
No, it was. I was actually thinking of it. It was invented about 1,000 years ago. He would be like, if he was in a battle, if you would need a medieval battle and you wanted one guy, like
or the Scottish games, or something. Yeah.
If you need a guy to be your knight or whatever to watch your ass, if you were like a duke or something, you get Patrick. You put him in a full set of armor, and you'd be like, all right, Patrick, time to protect me. That would be your game. He would win at that.
Yeah, but here's the problem: is that if you make him a knight, I don't think there's a horse that's going to hold him.
You need like a Clyde.
That's the problem. Yeah, you need like a Clyde, or you just go get elephants that he can ride or something.
He would be really well suited in Hammurabi's army. He would be a king of some kind of some large military nomad force, and he would crush people beneath his heel. That would be his job in the days of yore.
Yes. But bringing it back to basketball, the thing we're, I guess, supposed to be talking about. One of the things that I like about Patrick Young is that he has figured out that if he plays really hard for however many minutes he's in the game, by sheer virtue of the fact that he's a really, really good athlete, good things are going to happen for Florida, and good things are going to happen for him.
Well, eventually he tires people out.
Yeah, I mean, if he's leaning on you, it gets harder to move back up the court. If he's coming in and blocking your shot, that's demoralizing. If he's making a good post move, that's going to be difficult for him to, be blocked on. It's just really, really hard to man up. And I hate the term man up because, there's all sorts of weird things about masculinity in sports, but
it's also a cliche kind of thing, yeah.
But it's really, really hard to outwork Patrick Young, a motivated Patrick Young, for 30 minutes. Well, you will tire out at some point.
In the NBA, there are guys, there's a LeBron James in the NBA. There's a Dwight Howard in the NBA.
Yeah.
In the college, those guys really don't exist.
They're few and far between, yeah.
If they're around, they're the one guy that's like that. And they usually, like LeBron at 18, when he went to the NBA, he didn't have that skill set yet.
Yeah, I don't think so.
He wouldn't be able to guard Patrick Young any better than anybody else.
No.
But I guess one of the criticisms of this Florida team is that Florida doesn't draw enough fouls, right? Yeah. That's when you hear a lot. Florida doesn't get to the free throw line very often. And one of the common people who gets fouled a lot are the big guys inside. Because that's the easy foul. But the reality is Patrick Young's offense is actually so good where if he sees the potential for a foul, he'll go to his hook shot. Or he'll kick it out. Or he'll find the open man. And I mean...
And that's really smart. It's really smart, too, because he's still not a very good foul shooter. That's one of his big flaws. Probably his biggest flaw, and maybe the biggest flaw of any starter Florida has, is that he needs to kick it out. Yeah, it's an ugly shot, and it doesn't go in very much.
No, I think he's, 50-something% probably?
Yeah, somewhere around there, yeah.
I mean, I've seen his free throw. It's not pretty. It goes in sometimes, but, But I mean, to some degree, I guess maybe he knows that. He's like, well, I can get fouled here, make a point, or I could do this ridiculous thing and probably end up with 2 points. But it's a ridiculous thing.
And here's the other thing, is that it's really hard. I mean, people should hack Patrick Young. I frankly think that it's a far better proposition to have him go into the line shooting 2 free throws than giving him any sort of clear shot at the basket underneath. But it's really hard to hack Patrick Young.
He blows through people's arms.
He'll blow up your contact. It's just, and he'll elevate really quickly on you too. And this is a thing that he struggled with last year. He had problems getting into traffic and not being able to get back up. But he's gotten better at dribbling out of it, or if he's getting post position, moving away from contact. And
his ball skills are actually really not that bad. I saw some videos of him dribbling. Maybe it's the part of him not being as big a center, that he's a little shorter than most centers, but his ball skills are actually pretty surprisingly good.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to run the break for you every time, but he can dribble without tripping over himself. And that's something that, not even every big guy in college basketball can do. So that's an asset. Yeah,
I saw them run drills against the guards, and he actually has decent movement. He can dribble, and I mean, maybe that's what he'll be doing in the NBA, doing a little more of that. But I mean, there really is, one of my favorite Patrick Young moments, I guess, is because he has usually about once a game, Patrick Young does something where it's like, that's kind of unfair, Patrick Young. Don't be mean. But I still remember one of my favorite pictures from last year was the guy from Alabama who made a really blown up, huge version of his face. And there's a picture of Patrick Young dunking, and the guy's picture is where he made a copy of his face and he's making it at Patrick Young as Patrick Young is dunking. And it's one of the funniest pictures I saw of all of last year in sports.
But here's the good thing, is that picture, the guy's face, which is, his normal face, is the exact reaction you should have.
It's the reaction he's making,
Yes. I mean, that's exactly what people feel like when Patrick Young is dunking.
Well, it's just because usually every game he'll do something really mean. And, you don't know when it's going to happen, but you know it is going to happen.
Yeah.
Where he's going to do something and it's just going to be like, God, Jesus God. And it's like...
Yeah, he slapped a shot to the third row. Yep, that's Pat. That's
or like when he did the assist block.
Yeah.
To Mike Rosario.
Yeah, it's nuts.
And that's just something you don't see. And, I guess when you do see it, it's just like, well, I'm glad he's on our team. I remember watching the Kentucky. I saw the Kentucky SB Nation, and they were like, "Has he been here for 20 years? When is that guy gonna leave?"
Not soon enough.
I hope he comes back for a senior. He does seem to like playing college basketball at the very least. I hope he comes back, but you never know. Like I said, I just like watching him play. I think it's fun to watch him play college basketball. There's some guy like Kevin Durant. When Kevin Durant played college basketball for 1 year, he was a fun guy to watch play college basketball because he just scored 40 points a game or something. It was unfair. He should have been in the NBA, but it was still fun to watch when it happened. So I mean, we went through the entire roster. I guess we can talk a little about
basically the entire roster. I mean, there's Dylan Graham, Braxton Boise, and we're giving them short shrift here, but they're not major contributors. I don't think we need to.
I think they're probably still in development.
They've got promise. I like Boise, especially as a guy who can maybe come off the bench and do great things as a reserve point guard in years forward, but there's really no need for him to be playing right now.
Well, if you notice a trend, I guess, with our roster is it's full of seniors and juniors. Yeah. And, that's a criticism I hear from Kentucky fans is that, well, we have no stars. We have no draft picks. I mean, we have no lottery draft picks. And that means something, I guess, to them. But, I mean, at this point, I think Billy Donovan has shown that he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
But, because we've had a lot of fun games already this year. Namely the FSU game. The 72-47 victory over FSU. That was a fun game.
Yeah, I think Florida's been able to make even these blowouts, and some of the blowouts against SEC teams haven't been that fun, but that blowout against FSU was fun. The blowout against Missouri was fun. Florida finds ways to pour it on, really.
The blowout against Mississippi State were not fun. They were just mean.
Yeah.
That was just, it felt, when we nearly beat Mississippi State by 40 points, that was like, oh boy, that's not very nice. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care. We could beat Florida State by 40 points. I don't. But all the same, there's something I actually wanted to ask you about. So we saw Florida State actually win the ACC championship last year. We saw Florida, last year get pretty close to, Butler, but and this year we're seeing Miami, play really well. Is there something going on with Florida basketball, just in the state that's different than how it used to be?
I mean, I think there's probably some truth to the idea that there are more kids playing more sports at Miami. These sociological things do impact what player base you have. And Patrick Young's from Florida, Scotty Wilbekin's from Gainesville, Kenny Boynton's from Pompano Beach. Some of these guys that Florida gets to come play basketball at Florida are Floridians, and that's a cool thing. But the other thing is that when you get a good enough team together, you have a chance to go deep in the NCAA tournament every year. That's one of the fun things about parodies, that if you draw the right teams, like Florida State did last year to some extent, they got teams that they could sort of shut down and not do a whole lot of things, or not allowed to do a whole lot of things last year. They made a Sweet 16 because of it. Miami's probably going to make at least a Sweet 16, maybe the Elite Eight, maybe the Final Four, because they've got really good talent, some of it older talent. Kenny Cagey, a guy Florida fans know pretty well, is on that team. Reggie Johnson's been around forever. These teams, this talent is now being coached by a really good coach, Jim Larinaga, who Florida fans remember from being the George Mason coach when Florida faced George Mason in that Final Four. And when you get a really good team with a bunch of good talent, when it's senior talent like Miami has, sometimes you catch lightning for a year, and it helps when the ACC's kind of down. I mean, there's two other good teams in Duke and NC State in that conference, and that's about it. Florida's really good and looks really good this year because they're not playing a whole lot of great teams too.
Well, I mean, do we count this more as lightning in a bottle, or something like Kentucky where they have a collection of one-and-dones as lightning in a bottle?
See, here's the thing. If you do it in the context of the system, like Florida's done it in going to 2 straight Elite Eights. Florida obviously won 2 titles and was perennially winning 20 games under Billy Donovan, even before those 2 titles. Or when you do it with the Calipari system year after year and get these great recruiting classes year after year and send them off to the NBA. I think that's a system thing. It's more lightning in a bottle when you get the right talent with the right coach in Miami. I don't know that Larinaga's program at Miami is necessarily going to be on par with Florida's or Kentucky's or Indiana's or any of these other teams that you want to point at. But right now, he's got the promise of maybe creating that program. And when you get to the lightning in a bottle stage, maybe you get that program stage. Butler's done that. Butler's turned to...
I'm looking right now at the Gators news feed from ESPN, and it says 5 Kentucky recruits lead McDonald's roster for the high school All-American game. So, I mean, if they get Andrew Wiggin as well, is this just going to be another year for Kentucky next year where they replace all their guys and they bring in all new one-and-dones?
I mean, I don't know how many Kentucky players are honestly going to jump this year. There are a few guys, Archie Goodwin, Alex Poitras are probably 2 guys who might be NBA draft picks. Obviously, Nerlens Noel, I think, is still in the top 10 pick, maybe not the number 1 pick without that last 6 weeks of the season and with an injury concern. But that Kentucky class, even if Andrew Wiggins doesn't sign on, is the number 1 class in the country coming in next year. Yeah. And if Wiggins signs on, it might be the best recruiting class in college basketball history. I'm not saying that lightly. Pretty much everyone who writes about recruiting is going to write that up as the angle. And Wiggins, I think, is the best player to come into college basketball since Kevin Durant. So these things they align so well for Kentucky on a yearly basis that it's not surprising to see Kentucky with the number 1 class. But what Kentucky could do with that class would be even better. But the really interesting thing for a Florida fan is that Florida might have the 2nd or 3rd best recruiting class, even if it's just the 2 players, Casey Hill and Chris Walker, who are both top 15 recruits. And Florida's got more talent on campus that isn't even playing this year, and Dorian Finney-Smith and DeMontre Harris. So, I mean, Patrick Young might come back if he's not a high enough draft pick. Obviously, Scotty Wilbekin's going to be back unless he decides that it's important for him to go make millions of dollars before he's even 20. Or I guess before he's 21.
Before he's 21, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. But the idea that Kentucky and Florida have both built these programs that are programs that can do both, in Florida's case, build a core and add talent to that core each year, or in Kentucky's case, build an entirely new core each year, I think makes those two teams two of the better models for college basketball going forward.
Well, we only have, as far as I can tell, 7 games left in the season. What do you see? What do you see going forward?
I think there are. I think you said 7 games left in the ACC.
We have Auburn on Saturday.
Yeah,
that's Missouri.
Let's go. Here's the thing. Let's go through these games one by one. You read them off. I'll tell you what I think.
Okay, Auburn on February 16th.
15-point win, I think.
All right, at Missouri, February 19th.
Probably somewhere between a 5 to 12-point win, I think.
Will that player who was out, the injured player, will he be back for this game?
Yeah, I think he should be back for this game. Lawrence Bowers, the guy.
Lawrence Bowers, yes.
I believe he's been back. Missouri absolutely skunked somebody the other night. It might have been Texas A&M. They're a different team at home and a different team with Bowers, but I think Florida might still be a lot better than them.
Okay, Arkansas at home on February 23rd.
Revenge game, obviously. Arkansas's not going to shoot what they did. I think that's a good 15 to 20-point win.
All right, at Tennessee. We only played Tennessee once this year.
Yeah, it's strange.
We play Arkansas twice, so we play Mississippi State twice. I guess there's no more divisions in basketball, as I recall, isn't that the,
But, I mean, keeping the important rivalries like Florida-Mississippi State alive is something the SEC is committed to doing.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Committed. Forever.
So this is at Tennessee, right?
Yeah, this is at Tennessee on February 26th.
I think double-digit win. I'm not going to say 15, double-digit.
Double-digit. All right, and then we get at Alabama at home on the 2nd.
Yeah, that's going to be a 10 to 15-point win.
And we get at Vanderbilt at home on March 6th.
20-point win. Vanderbilt's not good this year, unfortunately.
And then we have our final game of the season, March 9th, at Kentucky.
So what was the score last night? It was a 17-point win, right?
Yes, it was a 69 to 52.
I think Florida might beat Kentucky by more in Rump.
I
think Nerlens Noel is just that big a guy.
Nerlens Noel makes a huge difference, clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah, his defense was nearly kept them. It was almost the Kentucky game to some degree right before Nerlens Noel got injured, felt a lot like the Ole Miss game where Florida was holding on to a 10 to 12-point lead like it was a tie game.
Yeah.
And it was largely because of Nerlens Noel that was even happening.
Yeah, and I think that this is a thing we're going to see from Florida in a lot of ways, is that it's going to feel like Florida's only barely hanging on because Florida's not, racing out to a 25-point lead.
Burying people, yeah.
But it's a 10-point lead, and that's definitely established position up ahead.
So you don't see us losing another one going forward?
I really don't. The trouble spots, I think, are that Missouri game, which Missouri's, I think, a better team now than Kentucky is without Noel.
Yeah, Noel as well. Well,
and
we saw...
And Missouri's also looking for revenge because Missouri got embarrassed, really, on the road. So.
Well, okay, so I'm looking at Missouri. Missouri housed Mississippi State.
That's
78 to 36.
Yeah.
Beat them by 42.
Yeah. Mississippi State is the worst SEC team, in fairness, but
they put up 98 on Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And
Missouri, when they have their offense going, Missouri can be really, really good.
And Texas A&M, they lost by 2 points too. Before that, the game. So, but the thing we've heard about Missouri is that their point guard has been their big deal, right? That's Brown, I believe.
Phil Pressey is the guy you're talking about.
Phil Pressey, yeah, 7 assists has been his average per game.
Mm-hmm.
But when he played Florida, he did not get close to that.
Yeah, Scotty Wilbekin did a number on him. He was basically frustrated out of the game.
Yeah, and so he looked pretty rough. As I recall, there were NBA scouts who were there at that game, who got to watch him basically, I guess, get shut down by Scotty Wilbekin, who probably made a pretty good case for getting drafted into the NBA by shutting him down. I mean, at the very least, as a role player.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the first the first moment when people realize, oh, hey, Scotty Wilbekin's an elite defender.
Two-star player, Scotty Wilbekin. So,
yeah,
I guess you never know. I mean, I don't I put more into star rankings for basketball than football, just because a high school senior for basketball that's like Andrew Wiggin, like he'll be good. It's gonna happen. That's not really in question. It's not like, but we've seen so many 5-star football recruits wash out before. It just happens all the time. So it's just it is a matter, I think, of I think Scotty Wilbekin is really making a case to play professionally now. But he'll probably come back. I think he will. He's a good point guard, but he's not an elite scoring point guard, certainly.
No. But he might. Who knows? If he's already improved this much, maybe he'll come back and become that.
It's true. He could get better. And we have the SEC tournament after the 7 stretch games. How do you see Florida doing? Should Florida actually should Florida do? I've always wondered how useful these conference tournament games are at the end of the year when you have the NCAA tournament coming up, which is really legitimately way more important.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think Florida should do for the SEC tournament?
Win it, I think. I mean, honestly, the thing about if you're in the Big Ten tournament this year, I mean, somebody's not going to win it, whether it's Indiana or Michigan or Ohio State or Michigan State or Wisconsin. 4 of those teams are not going to win the Big Ten tournament.
Right.
But they're going to probably beat somebody of value on the way. Whoever Florida plays in the SEC tournament might not be as valuable to its stock as any of those teams that the Big Ten teams play. So Florida's really got to guard against losses again. It's the same philosophy that goes into Florida needing to win every SEC game it can. Is that any one of these losses might knock Florida off that number 1 seed line. And that's unfortunate this year, especially because Florida's playing so well. And, even if Florida loses another game, it's probably not going to knock Florida off the top perches in some advanced rankings that value what Florida does on a per possession basis. But I mean, that's the catch-22 is that you can be as good as you want, but if you're playing really well against bad teams, I mean, look at Gonzaga too, people aren't going to respect you doing that until you've done it completely. There's always going to be room to trip up.
The unfortunate thing is we're probably going to pass Michigan in the rankings this week. But we might get passed by Michigan State.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan State played an incredible game.
They totally annihilated Michigan.
Yeah.
So we might get a little advantage there. I mean, I know the RPI and the AP don't matter at all for tournament seeding, but
RPI matters. USA Today, you're right. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
So I mean, even if Florida gets put at number 5, it probably doesn't matter that much. We still have Syracuse ahead of us, Gonzaga.
Yeah, and Syracuse might fall too. Syracuse has been playing pretty poorly of late.
Yeah, they lost to UConn
the other night. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we have Florida. I guess that was the 4th game. So this was last. So Florida's probably going to pass Syracuse. Potentially pass Syracuse and Michigan this coming week. So we probably will get passed by Michigan State.
Yeah.
So
the problem for Florida is that it's looking more and more like there's going to be 2 Big Ten teams winning the Derby for number 1 seeds. And if 2 Big Ten teams do that, it's going to be pretty difficult, I think, for Florida to get there.
Well, basketball question: how important is a 1 seed compared to the 2 seed?
I think it's an interesting thing, but not a. I don't think if you're a 2 seed, you're automatically that much worse. I mean, there's a 2 seed that's 1 rung down from a 1 seed when you think of it like that. But the thing about a 1 seed is that you don't have to play a 7 seed in the second round, and you don't have to play a possible 3 seed in the Elite 8. And a 3 seed, I mean, when you think of 4 seeds as the teams that are in, the top 20, but maybe not the top 15, whereas a 3 seed might be a number 8 or 9 team in the country. That's a really big advantage. And the 1 seed's route to the Elite 8 is a really, really big advantage. I think Florida getting a 2 seed doesn't necessarily mean Florida's not going to make it to the Final Four, because I think Florida matches up against pretty much anyone well anyway. But as a 1 seed, I'm going to have a really, really hard time picking against Florida to get to the Final Four.
Oh, that's all right. That's interesting at the very least.
Yeah.
And Florida, I guess, if Florida just keeps winning, I mean, these teams are going to lose because a lot of them have to play each other. Duke and Miami are going to play each other again.
Yeah.
I believe, at the very least, we'll probably play in the ACC tournament. And they also have another game March 2nd, so, regardless, it's I don't know if it's completely like football where even if you lose to the same opponent, sort of, in a championship game, you think it wouldn't affect the rankings, but any loss kind of does, regardless, because it's kind of stupid. But all the same, I think a 1 seed is still a possibility. I hope it is anyway, but I mean,
I think it is. I definitely think that it's going to be hard for, it's going to be hard in one sense for Florida to lose that 1 seed perch because it's hard to lose to an SEC team when you're as good as Florida is. So, I mean, it's the thing that's nice about the SEC, which is that no team is probably going to give Florida a really tough test unless they shoot really well, is also the bad thing that Florida can get knocked out as a number 1 seed
I was
for good by losing.
I was thinking about this. What
Yeah.
is it? It feels like Florida in the SEC for basketball is kind of like how Florida State was in the ACC for football last year.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad description.
And I mean, I remember what happened when Florida State ended up playing us, and it turned out not so great for them because because by the fourth quarter they were gassed. And I'm just hoping that doesn't translate over to basketball. Assure me, Mr. Basketball, that does not translate over to basketball.
I'm not sure about that, and I think Florida is better than Florida State was. Florida is better at college basketball than Florida State was at college football. But there's more variance, I think, in a game of basketball than there is a game of football. You get 60 minutes to play a football game, and you get 40 to play a basketball game, and each shot is worth 3 points, whereas it's harder to get a 6-point touchdown and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I don't know for sure. I think Florida's going to be favored substantially in every game from here on out. And I think Florida's got a pretty good chance of making good on that favoring. But, yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, you've got to let college kids play their games. And you can't make any assumptions that are concrete, 100% positive assumptions.
All right. Well, fair enough.
Sorry.
That's not assured at all, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Maybe I should just look at recruiting rankings more for college football and feel better that way.
Maybe.
Well, at least
Those are good.
Yeah, they were good. That's all I know. I don't put a lot of stock in football ranking, but I do know we're winning. That's all we really we need to care about, I guess. All right, so I guess we'll probably talk again before March Madness starts, before the college.
Yes, definitely.
And we'll do a little preview of a path to the championship because I mean unless Florida just completely melts down in some horrific, disturbing way, Florida's going to be in the tournament, and so it's a matter of where we start in that tournament. So. Mm-hmm. I guess we'll do another one then. But until then, thanks for coming for joining me, Andy. I hope I didn't ask you too many questions about basketball that are probably extremely obvious to you.
Yeah, I enjoy questions. This is fun. Thanks for having me.
All right. So from this special basketball edition of the Gator Sports Podcast, this is Charles, and thanks for listening. See you at the tournament time. Bye. How I do right now, except for maybe when I think of how I felt that day, when I felt the way that I do right now.